Good morning. Looks like everybody's got their coffee and goodies, so let's get started. First, I'd like to say Happy Mother's Day to any of you with mothering instincts. So today we're going to talk about church and state, and a lot of what we talk about comes from a social statement. The social statement is titled Faith and Civic Life, Seeking the Well-Being of All. And looking around, I think many of you have already read that. If you haven't and you want to, and I would highly encourage that, you can get a copy of it from the office. There's big print ones you can check out, there's little ones you can have. I see Carol has one right there. So this social statement was adopted at the last churchwide assembly of ELCA in August. It contains 6 sections, it contains 49 articles, it's 92 pages, but there's a lot of those pages that are like glossary and synopses that you could skip. So it's not really 92 pages, it's not that bad. Why is this interesting to us? Well, if you look at the conclusion after all those 6 sections, in there it says, may God's word and sacraments empower all people in this church to seek the well-being of the neighbor through active and faithful participation in civic life. Think about that and compare it to the line just below that on the slide, which is our mission statement. Growing together in Christ to love and serve all people. Those sound pretty darn similar. So today what we're going to focus on is what this social statement has to say about church and state. And a lot of that comes from part of the first section, a large portion of the middle of it in sections 3, 4, and 5. So if you want more detail than I'm presenting, again, go back to the social statement, read those sections, because they'll explain things a lot better than I'm sure I will. First, let's talk about the U.S. Constitution and what it has to say about church and state. There's a lot of words that you will not find in the U.S. Constitution. You won't find God, Jesus, Christ, Spirit, church, or religion anywhere in there. What words do you find? You find words like justice, equity, states, common, like common welfare. You do find the word religious. It appears one time in Article 6 where it says, no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. Now, when that was adopted, that was actually a pretty big change, because at that point, 11 of the 13 states had laws like that requiring a religious qualification. So for the founding members who created this Constitution to have made this kind of a change was pretty revolutionary, so to speak. So a lot of people talk about, the United States being a Christian nation. And I think that this kind of statement, this kind of change, speaks to the fact that that's not what the founding members wanted it to be. They wanted it to be not anti-religious, but a-religious, not take a stand on religion. And in fact, George Washington in 1796 made a very clear statement where he said, the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. That doesn't mean that there aren't moral statements that in a high level of similarity between what a religious person might believe and what you'll find in the Constitution. There certainly is. But the idea is, as I said, it's an a-religious document. So that was the Constitution. How about the amendments? How about the Bill of Rights? First, let's look a little bit about where that came from. So the Bill of Rights was I said Constitution, I meant the Bill of Rights, was ratified in, that is right. In 1788, the Constitution was ratified. During...
Yeah, could you stand up?
If I'm here,
could you stand on the other side?
I can stand the other side.
There, right there. Yeah.
Don't move now.
Yeah.
Don't move now.
You're right.
You're going somewhere. Don't be
You're
right
fine.
Right there.
Right where you
You're
are.
fine.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
I need to be close enough to read this because it's hard to read it. So the Constitution was ratified in 1788, and during the Constitutional Convention where that was created, there were a lot of people who felt that the Constitution should include a list of rights. But there were also people on the other side, mainly the Federalists, who felt like, no, it shouldn't, because there's no way you're ever going to get that list of rights correct. They came up with a compromise, which was, let's ratify the Constitution the way it is, but let's all agree that we are going to immediately work on creating that Bill of Rights. And they did. So 3 years later, the Bill of Rights was ratified. And let's look at one of those amendments in the Bill of Rights, and that's the First Amendment. So it begins with, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And that's discussed in Article 29 of the Social Statement if you want more information. Constitutional scholars like to break that down into two clauses. They call it the Establishment Clause, which is the part that says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And the Free Exercise Clause, where it says Congress shall make no law prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And if anybody has any questions at any point, let me know.
Tom, I don't want to see if you would say that. I didn't want to jump in without. Could you go back about, I think, 2 slides? Wait a second. I think one more before that. Doggone it. There was something about, there was the word trust with a capital T. I don't know if you can find that. I didn't know. No, okay. Well, not there. Let me see. Oh, yeah. So there, in the middle, in the little smaller text, Article 6, no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office, I get that, office, or public trust. Do you know what public trust is referring to in that?
So the question is in Article 6 where it talks about there being no religious test for a public trust. What does public trust mean?
Yeah.
The answer is, I'm not sure, but it's basically, you are somebody involved in public life, in civic life, where you are entrusted to do things. And primarily these are talking about, again, I would suggest go back to the article where this comes from,
Okay.
Or you could Google that phrase, and I'm sure that you will find that, because that's a quote from somewhere.
I think it would just be any appointment or somebody who is not elected but set up as head of the whatever.
So
Is it just anybody who's elected?
maybe.
Yeah.
It certainly is anybody that is elected, but what if somebody's appointed? I suspect it would
Yeah.
also include them as well.
Entrusted with government.
Yeah, entrusted.
Like
or,
we said, you
And
have to be a
also-
Christian in order to be head of the.
or like a
EPA.
trustee,
Exactly.
like
Yeah.
a trustee position kind of thing, yeah.
And they
okay.
also, notice test is also capitalized. They were kind of willy-nilly with their punctuation, so don't be like, oh, it must be a proper noun.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
This
capitalization
punctuation
rules
came
don't-
straight out
Yeah,
of the
exactly.
article, and it's a quote from
Yeah,
somewhere else, so that the article would hopefully reference where that came from.
Okay.
I can't really speak any further to
Qualifications
why
is
certain words
capped,
are
office is
capitalized
capped.
and others.
Yeah, don't be looking at it like an English teacher, it's not working.
All right, so what does the First Amendment mean? First, let's talk about what it means in terms of the government. What it means is it's providing protection for religious liberty. Unless that liberty is harming legitimate interests of the broader community. So I'll reference articles throughout here. So if you want to hear more about or learn more about anything in here, you can go to those articles and get a deeper feel for what this says and why, when the Churchwide Assembly ratified this or approved this, they added that into the article. But the basic idea is we're not going to have a state religion. We're going to let everybody choose for themselves what religion they wish to believe in or whether they wish to even believe in religion. And that gets to the second bullet, which is the government must not promote any one or even any faith. And if we're going to not promote a faith, we shouldn't be displaying religious symbols. We shouldn't be funding religious or anti-religious activities. Public schools shouldn't be evangelizing or providing religious instruction. Now, there are exceptions to this. So for example, if they're, like, you go to the Smithsonian and they've got some historical presentation, if in the context of that historical presentation, it makes sense to have some religious symbols presented, that makes sense. But if you're presenting them because they are religious symbols out of any other context, that is promoting a religion, and that is what the Constitution, the Bill of Rights was meant to say, no, we don't believe that we should be doing this. The government authority should only be covering secular matters.
Yeah, nice catch.
Thank you. The other part is that the government should treat service providers equally. And what that means is, so I mentioned previously that the government shouldn't be funding religious activities. If a religious organization is performing some function, then it's the same one that a secular organization would perform. Feeding the hungry, supporting children in their needs at schools. The government, if they're funding the secular organization, should similarly fund the religious organization. Or if, say, a local government is providing funding to improve playgrounds at schools, whether it's a religious school or a non-religious school, that kind of funding, because it has to do with something that's not religious per se, should be treated equally.
I have a quick question.
Yes?
Does anyone know if any of the public schools are solely funded at the state level, and that the state could make a decision to put the 10 Commandments up in the classroom?
Texas actually did that.
Yeah.
And so the question was, can a state decide to put up the 10 Commandments in public schools? Texas passed a law recently to do that. And we can talk more about that in a bit. So that's the church, or the government version. So we talked about what that means and what the First Amendment means for the government. What does it mean for churches? It means we, each religious organization, are in charge of our own destiny. We decide what the correct interpretation of our faith is. That should not come from the government. We decide who deserves to be our leaders. We vote for our leaders. Unless it's hurting the common good, the government should not be involved in that at all. And you'll hear a lot about the wall of separation of church and state. So when I started this, I did not talk about that because that's not in the Constitution, that's not in the Bill of Rights. Separation of church and state is a separate idea. I think it was originated or spoken about by Thomas Jefferson, but it's been used by many people in many different contexts to mean many different things. So when you hear it, I would ask you to think about what it means for us. And what it means is what it says in the Constitution and in the Bill of Rights. When you think about the First Amendment, so I talked about the Free Exercise Clause and the Establishment Clause. There's others, such as free speech. So when you think about free speech and the Free Exercise Clause, what that means in terms of the church is that it protects and promotes religious diversity. It's because of that we have so many different faith traditions here in the United States. It protects the rights of individuals to bring their beliefs, some would say faith, into political discussions and decision making. Clearly, we have strong faith, we have morals that come from our faith. We should be able to bring those beliefs to this discussion. And finally, it protects the right of religious communities to engage in public debate according to their religious convictions. There was nothing in there that said, religions, people that are religious, you can't come and be part of a political discussion. What it said was, government, you can't control the religious organizations. So in fact, if you go, and I think this was Article 31, it talks a lot about the fact that yes, we can and we should. We have deep beliefs as religious people. We should be able to bring those beliefs to the discussion, to the table when we talk about political issues. Not about specific politicians per se, but about maybe policies. And specifically, what does the Lutheran edition of this all mean? If you read Romans 13, it talks about respecting civil authorities and institutions. And the writers of this social statement added the word good to that. We're not going to respect civil authorities and institutions that are not working toward the common good. But if they are working toward the common good, if we view what they're doing as in alignment with our beliefs, we need to respect them. So the basis is respect them unless you have a reason not to. But as I say further, and this is covered up in several of the articles, 21 through 26, we do have a responsibility to call individuals and institutions to account. So when they are not working toward the common good, if they're working for their own, improving themselves, we have a responsibility to call them on that. And the way we should do that is by working with civil authorities in areas of mutual endeavor. Let's find out how we can work together on things and do better together, basically. Wow, that was quick. Before we move on, any questions?
So you mentioned earlier, we were talking about the Supreme Court which weighed in on the thing in Texas. Said it was okay, right? And that's why I'm trying to figure out how they come up with that's okay. The other thing is little things like politicians, people get sworn into office and they put their hand on the Bible. Is that just tradition, or is that sort of, it seems like it's a supportive religious, not quite a test, but it seems like it's a little supportive of a particular faith tradition.
So two big questions there. One is quite often when politicians are voted in or sworn into office, it's by placing their hand on the Bible. You also will see things like "In God We Trust." What's that all about?
Yeah, right.
Good question. I don't have a good answer.
Okay.
Well, I mean, they're taking an oath, right, to uphold the Constitution, and by putting your hand on the Bible. Although we haven't yet had let's say, for example, Jewish president, that could happen, and I would think that they would use a holy book that's appropriate
or just
for
the
their-
Old Testament.
I think we get-
So the question is, what if we had a Jewish president?
Or a Jewish congressman, they put their hand on it.
Or a congressman,
Yeah,
or
like the Old
any
Testament,
yeah.
politician voted into office.
But what about an
What would they do?
atheist?
Would they use the Bible, or would they use a different book? What about, my understanding is Abe Lincoln was agnostic. Did he have to put his hand on the Bible? What if he, had a moral objection to that? Those are all great questions, and it's something for us to think about. And to me, that goes back to the other part of what Mark asked, which was about the Texas law. Why did the Supreme Court feel that it was acceptable for Texas to pass a law requiring, I don't know if it was requiring or allowing, I said requiring public schools to display the Ten Commandments? And that's a great question. And in fact, that's something I would like not me to answer, because I don't have the answer, but I would like to open it up for all of you to have a discussion. In fact, I've got this discussion slide here that I'm going to hand out now. And I would ask you to make sure you're sitting at a table with people you don't normally sit with. Because if you're sitting with the people that you always talk to, it's not going to be a very lively discussion. So I would ask you to get up, move around after I answer one question from Michael. Sit somewhere else, and I'll hand out this discussion slide. Michael, you had a question?
I did. Isn't the reason that we use the Bible is because the Judeo-Christian worldview is the basis for Western civilization?
So the question is the reason we politicians speak their oath of office, placing their hand on the Bible, because things are based on Judeo-Christian beliefs? And the answer is no. At the very beginning, what I said was very clearly the Constitution, when it was written, was an a-religious document. The only statement in there about religion was that there can be no religious test for a position, for an office, for an elected or an appointed office. And in fact, George Washington made a very clear statement to that effect, that it is not based on any religion.
So what is our foundation? Is that?
I would say what is our foundation? I would say it's a moral foundation.
Well, where did that come
Several of
from?
those morals match our religious morals. But it wasn't,
You can trace those same morals back to the Greeks
you can trace those same moral beliefs back to the Greeks.
or the
Oh,
Chinese.
there's an empty seat.
There you go.
Yeah, we don't have a corner on the market of
Not
moral
moral,
nations.
yeah, I mean, yeah.
That's not an empty seat.
So I'm gonna turn off the mic and let us all chat.
I wanted to point out a little known fact which I learned recently, that Islam was present here in the United States prior to the American Revolution. It was prevalent among slaves from North Africa that were brought here, or West Africa that we had, of course, a lot, mostly from West Africa. Interestingly, it died out after the American Revolution, and I'm not sure why. Maybe those people just sort of got assimilated into Christianity. But that's actually a fact that I think is worth mentioning because, again, kind of speaks to this religious diversity or non-establishment of a particular Christian or whatever religion. So there's a lot of misconception about that, it seems, but yeah.